Here is a summary of Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. Part number 4. A little warning before we start. Part number 4, it's the most heavy part of this book. I will also be going through the epilogue of the book because it's just related to what's part 4 the most, as is the rest of the book. So let's get this started with. First of all, part 4 itself is just a recontinuation of something that we've just been told about, just different ideas and different analogies and different questions. Like some of them, the chapters, their titles even giving the answers away. Like this, for example. Why are the Chinese Chinese? This itself might seem like a simple question. This isn't the exact title, I'm just paraphrasing. The official title is probably something like How the Chinese Became Chinese. But regardless, this one is also an interesting way to think about it. Because when you think about it, China has always been like in a unitary kind of government. Everyone's been culturally connected towards each other for centuries, and as far as anyone can remember. In fact, I'm pretty sure the very first empire itself has unified the whole part of China. They created into this one-party system. Technically a government. But other than that, there's not much else I can really talk about. Then we also have to talk about how the Japanese became Japanese, and then how, this is probably one of the most controversial ones, how the Africans became, I'm not kidding, this is what the title is called, How the Africans Became Black. Now, before calling me a racist, just please do know that there's a geographical and environmental reasons for all of these things. None of them being anything related towards like, oh, the whites are better than the blacks. No. In fact, Jared Diamond himself gives counter arguments towards those, but I will not be getting into those because that will be a waste of time. Now, firstly, I should also talk about languages. Languages, or whatever the cultural kind of thing that we're talking about, it's the fact that, hey, for language, it's that Jared Diamond specifically heavily uses language to go and try to trace back roots into cultures. Like, one of the weird things about dating when the Japanese became Japanese is the fact that they themselves biologically look like they came into Japan like centuries ago, when their language suggests that they've been there for about 5,000 years ago. So obviously we need to do something different to figure this out. That's where historical artifactual evidence starts to come in. But I don't think we should really be talking about that a little too deeply. So I'll try to summarize it right now. Now, there are several things that we could talk about, like pottery and stuff. But then again, this pottery stuff, it's also a very kind of sensitive towards the issue. Like, as a Korean myself, I understand this issue, and I was pretty sensitive towards it myself. Not saying I hate the Japanese. In fact, in some parts, I do love about the Japanese. But, yeah. If you want to understand, then go to this link. This is SEAMPLAYZ_9471. You will understand once you go in there and hit top or hot of my posts. But regardless, other than my social accounts, here we also have to talk about all the things about the guns, germs, and steels. Technically, we already talked about the guns, we even talked about the germs, we even talked about the steels. Now we have to talk about why the guns, the germs, and the steels were in these different places at these different times. It just so happened that throughout history, places around the world that pretty much had all these metals themselves were the ones where you got technological innovation. But then you have to look at places like, let's say, Australia, and technically, arguably, New Zealand. In these places, there was several metals deposits around there. But why weren't they all tapped into it, and why didn't they use those too? Like, they even had more access to metals than, let's say, the Europeans ever had compared to their population sizes. But technically, that's kind of why they were able to develop guns, and they were still stuck in the Stone Age until the Europeans came along. And the fact is, once you have the raw materials, but you don't know how to use them, or you have no use to know how to use this thing, well, you can pretty much say bye-bye to guns. And also, there's the fact that cows or any other big animal that could help with manual labor did not exist. So there was no sufficient protein source, and the only thing that they did have were grains. And grains are not great for building muscle. Sure, they're great for growing up, but they're not great for growing muscles. Whereas the Eurasians had that in abundance. The Australians and the New Zealanders, and arguably the Americans, did not have that. Sure, the Americans had buffalo, but do you see any buffalo nowadays? Speaking of that, we should also talk about agriculture. Agriculture itself only appears in certain places. We've already talked about language before. We already talked about manual labor before. And we talked about steels. At least that's what I remember. Either you read the book or you watched my videos, which are not that good in quality. But here, you have to talk about agriculture in the sense of latitudes and longitude. I already told you about latitude and longitude in part 1, but in the sense of like that's how distribution works. But latitude, you have to be in the right place to have the right amount of stuff. And technically, you also have to be in the right place to get the right kind of animals. To be honest, this is just kind of luck. Like, if Earth was a video game, then here's the great part. The tutorial, you unlock voice chat, it takes like 1 to 3 years or something to unlock voice chat. Some people even take 5 years to unlock voice chat, and then you have 18 years to complete the tutorial. And after the tutorial, yeah, you have to do stuff. You get banned at like level 70 to 80, so nowadays level hundreds exist. The only good thing about this place is that there's zero lags. Like the ping, it's like 0 milliseconds per second. Technically 1 millisecond because we humans still have to have reaction timing. And bad thing is, certain people have terrible graphics. Other than that analogy itself, I think you can understand where I'm going with this. The thing is, people go ahead and start to have all these lives and whatever things that they happen on Mother Earth, or Mother Nature, take your pick. But Jared Diamond himself goes ahead and explains with guns, germs, and steel onto the locations. Like, why was it that the Europeans were the ones that conquered the Africans and not the other way around? Like, if there was like a little slight technological shift towards how Earth worked, like let's say that the equator was actually the place where you could grow a bunch of good crops, and like the extremes were the cool, like the hot parts, and you would probably have a very different world today. Like maybe even arguably the Africans themselves might be the white ones and the Eurasians might be the black ones. Alternate universe. Speaking of which, alternate history hub. Ever heard of it? But this eventually does answer the original question that we were always trying to answer. Yali's question. Why were the Europeans the ones that brought so much cargo to New Guinea, and New Guinea have little cargo of their own? New Guinea themselves have a lot of cargo of their own, just that for them it's very useful, but for the Eurasians, they have better stuff, better cargo. Technically, the New Guineans also have cargo that the Eurasians value. Why else would the Eurasians come to New Guinea? But New Guineans were the ones who just did not know how to harness it. You have the raw materials, but you have no need for those raw materials, and you also have no way to harness those raw materials. Then, I'm sorry, but there's not much you can do. Like, as I mentioned earlier, no protein, you don't really build up the muscle strength, and they didn't have domesticated animals compared to like Europe and Asia. North America's big downside was also that they didn't have domesticated animals, forcing them to become hunter-gatherers part-time. So why Europeans? Why are the Europeans the superior ones? Why is the white race as in Europeans, are the ones that go ahead and are above pretty much every other race of every other ethnicity? And apparently blue people exist. So yeah, that was a fun fact. Why are the Europeans or the Eurasians these two the ones that dominate throughout the entire politics in the world? Well, mainly because they're the ones who are able to get a head start. Normally, in the original saying was that the yellow ones, the Eurasians, the Asians were the ones that went ahead and had the superior technological advantage towards the Europeans. But then local politics kind of changed and made them change their minds, and then they decided to restrict access to trade to everywhere. And then that's when the Europeans took this opportunity to go ahead and leap towards the technological faith until like the Chinese were like seen as very backwards. But then China was introduced towards the European ideas, and then throughout that unitary policy, they finally decided that they needed to change. And then suddenly they're the ones, arguably probably because of that unitary policy, they're the ones that go ahead and are going through leaps and bounds way faster than the Europeans do. The European good side is that they're fragmented into so many different factions that if one faction decides to just try to adopt an invention, it works for them, everyone else will adopt it. The one bad thing about China is that it's unitary. That one person decides that it's not useful, even though it might be useful, then everyone will think it's not useful, or at least even if it is very useful. So it's great to have a cultural melting pot for Europe, but for Asia that might be a downside. But then again, if it was the opposite, then we had a very, very different world. So to answer Yali's question, Europeans are superior because of geological, geographical, and environmental reasons, not racial reasons or climatical reasons. So that's about the end of the summary of part 4. And I hope to see you guys soon. Until next time, Shihana, peace. Bye-bye.